Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Region 11's monthly webinar series. My name is Brianna Ingeseth, and I am part of the Chapter Relations team at HFMA. To kick off the webinar, we would like to thank our sponsors, AmPlus, Commerce Healthcare, Progressive Management Systems, Parallon, Firm, TCF Capital Solutions, Harris & Harris, Extend Healthcare, Access One, HRG, AccuReg, Novus, Mail My Statements, Brault, Premier, Centauri, TrueBridge, Avadine Health, Patient Matters, Argos Health, RMC, EnableComp, State, Sherlock, iBailey, Softtech, OVAG International, Vitalware. Your participation is requested. There will be live Q&A during the webinar, so put your questions in the Q&A pod. We'll also be utilizing the chat pod to share information and tips during the session. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Ramona Hernandez, RE2 for Region 11.
There I am. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Michael Ford has 20 years experience focusing on specialty reimbursement niche of revenue cycle. As one of the first employees of MRA, Medical Reimbursements of America, now Revecore, he's accredited with a great deal of MRA's growth from a startup company into one of the largest national specialized claim resolution companies in the U.S. Michael is a licensed healthcare attorney with deep understanding of the relevant legal, operational, and compliance challenges related to complex accident claims. He has assisted in driving the company's expansion to more than 600 hospital clients throughout the U.S. And he currently serves as the Chief Development Officer steering strategic direction and the company's leading the team's business development and marketing professionals. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Michael Ford.
Thank you, Ramona. I appreciate that. So welcome, everybody. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today on something that I've spent a lot of time on over the past 20 years, and that's accident claims. So you'll hear me today when I talk about accident claims. I use that term to define auto claims as well as workers' comp. They're both oftentimes, just accidents. So you'll hear me say that throughout. And this will be somewhat informal. I do have the open questions as mentioned, so I will try to keep an eye on those as we go throughout, and I'll try to answer those kind of in process. I will keep an eye on the clock. I know we have a hard stop here after 1 hour, so I'll try to stay on track there and perhaps maybe even have some time at the end. So thank you. And then let me tell you really kind of a high level outline of what we're going to discuss today. One, I want to start out with just a little bit about who we are as a company. I think that's helpful because I think it helps just credential a little bit, why I'm speaking today, hopefully. I'm going to talk about what normal revenue cycle looks like and then how that compares to complex claims, why these claims are so challenging, and really why do they matter? Why are we focusing on this, and why have I spent 20 years of my life focusing on these claims? I'm going to talk a little bit about legal nomenclature because I think that matters more and more with some of the class action lawsuits that we're tracking. Talk a little bit about state laws within this region. I won't be able to spend a lot of time on the state laws. There's a lot that I could talk about with respect to that, but given the time allowance we have today, I just won't have time to go into depth. So I'll kind of skip through those. You'll have a copy of this presentation, I'm sure, emailed to you. So you can take a look at some of those. And you'll notice too that I have not been able to spend a lot of detail on that, even in the presentation, because of, there's just too much, candidly. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do this right. So in-house, how do you do this? Talk a little bit about process overview, some suggested KPIs that we utilize and that we would suggest you as well focus on. And then some best practice tips, some things that we've seen that might not be so obvious that you guys should think about. And then I'm at the end going to talk a little bit about, if you decide this is something you want to outsource, what are some potential considerations that might not be the obvious considerations. So we'll spend a few minutes on that. So thank you, and let's just jump right in. So who am I? Who is Revecore? Well, just to give you a little bit of background, Revecore is the combination of two companies, Bottom Line Systems, BLS, and MRA, Medical Reimbursements of America. We've both been 20, 25 years in existence. Bottom Line Systems historically is always focused on underpayments and denials and their recovery and prevention. And MRA obviously has always focused on motor vehicle accidents and workers' compensation. I've been with MRA for 20 years, and these two companies coming together made a lot of sense to have specialized niche sort of boutique solutions all under one roof. On the MRA side, which is where we'll be focusing today, we were very happy that we were recently awarded the first place in the complex claims category of the 2021 report. We process about $1.5 billion of dollars in just accident claims every year. We're based out of Nashville. We are SOC 2 type 2 certified, HFMA peer reviewed for over 6 years. And so that's a little bit of background as to kind of who Revecore is as a company. I'm just going to look here on the right side of this page, talk a little more about that. Again, really just to try to help credential our knowledge of this niche. But typically, we bring about a 350% ROI to our clients. I mentioned about the number of claims that we process since 2000. It's almost 4 billion actually. And we've got a current count about 600 hospital clients that we serve in about 42 states. So we've done this for a long time. We know this niche very, very well. So I think this is a good starter slide. You'll know if any of you have had the unfortunate distinction of sitting through a webinar that I've done or a presentation at AHAM or HFMA or anything like that, I think my style is always to start at a very high level to try to level set an understanding with respect to complex claims. So some of this is going to be obvious, but that's okay. Good for you. But for those of you that aren't, I really want to start high level and then kind of get a little more granular as we go. And I think this is a good starter slide for that. And really what this indicates is, if you just look at this top arrow here, this is showing a standardized revenue cycle process. Okay, patient access happens often. You have pre-registration that occurs, the bill is dropped, you have coding, claim is generated, cycles through your clearinghouse, and then that bill largely is automated. The payment processes are automated to each of the payers. And then on the back end, obviously, you would receive that payment directly back to your facility. It posts if there's any self-pay or balance after insurance, those have been pursued. But in large part, that's a pretty seamless process. There's a great deal of technology that you're able to capitalize, whether your billing system's Epic or you have clearinghouse solutions that you're able to tap into. It's a fairly seamless process. I know there's a lot of mistakes. I know there's a lot of challenging issues that are still involved in that. But when accident claims present, they sort of break this mold. And you can see we've tried to kind of highlight here, the orange is where an accident claims or a complex claims kind of breaks things. Patient access, these patients are coming into the ER oftentimes. There's not any sort of pre-registration done. So the information has to get captured as much as can be at the point of patient access. A lot of times the patient might not know the insurance information that they need to have or the detail they need to provide to you so that you can get the claim billed out. Once the claim is ready for billing, determining who to bill and how to bill. These bills are most of the time very manual in nature, paper-based, a lot of medical record needs. Understanding the coordination of benefits amongst the different payers can be challenging, and kind of changes depending on what information or insurance they have. So this is very manual, and the payment process back is somewhat manual. So this is sort of just a very high level set to give you some distinction of standard revenue cycle versus complex claims. The other visual that we show oftentimes is this one. We call this our spaghetti slide. And we spent some time on this a few years ago because it really, I think, highlights the pain of accident claims. It highlights the challenges that you guys have with managing these patient accounts. And I'm going to walk you through this real quickly. So if you notice here in the top left of my screen, the patient is involved in a motor vehicle accident. On the right, this is a workers' compensation scenario. So let's just focus on the auto accident first. This patient presents to the hospital. The first thing that has to be done, you can see this line here, is registration. As I mentioned in the previous slide, registration in these cases are obviously not pre-scheduled. They're not pre-registered. This effort to gain the information you need is manual. So this little M here stands for manual process. The investigation around what happened in the accident is also manual. It's a lot of Q&A with the patient, the injured person, maybe the family, if they're there. Then you have to identify the right insurances and verify those insurances. And that becomes rather frustrating. You might get State Farm, you might get the employer's name on the work comp side, but then you have to call those carriers, figure out who to call, where to call, if there's an adjuster, track that information down. Again, manual process. This is, I talk about complex claims, accident claims as sort of the 1950s billing process, because there's very little technology that's really brought to bear in this niche. Once you've determined who the payers are, so stay focused on this left side here, assuming in this case you've got a no-fault insurance carrier, so that's the MedPay or the PIP insurance. You've got a liability case out there, so you've got liability insurance. You have health insurance, whether it's government or commercial. And then, if there is liability insurance, you might have to lien protect those settlements. If there's an auto payer, if there's MedPay, or if there's PIP, to bill that carrier, you see here this little envelope indicating that's a manual paper-based bill. Any kind of payment back is going to be in a form of a check, usually a one-off for that particular patient account. Liability insurance, to bill the liability insurance in most states, these are require filing of a lien, which is a fee oriented thing. You got to follow up with the patient's attorney, track the case, oftentimes negotiate some sort of settlement on that account if the lawyer wishes to and tries to get you to do that. But billing these liability claims and filing liens, again, for most states on this call, these are manual processes. These are manual filings. This is paper being mailed out, and payments that come back are again in the form of a paper-driven check. Health insurance obviously is very different. That's where technology comes back into play with 837s, 835s, but most of the players in this field are not. The other challenging aspect here, as most of you guys know on this call, is that there are a lot of strict coordination of billing rules surrounding how you bill these different payers and in what order. There's also administrative rules with how you bill. In some cases, electronic billing. Some, like for the example of California, payers have to accept, work comp payers have to accept these in electronic format. Providers don't necessarily have to bill that way, but there's a lot of things that can go wrong here. And we all know, I won't throw any punches, but personal injury lawyers and plaintiff attorneys are looking for hospitals to do this wrong and are not shy about filing lawsuits if and when they see something that looks off. So fairly manual. Workers' comp is very similar. Again, these are accident claims. They're very unique. One just happened at work and one happened in a car. And sometimes it is an employee in a car, but Again, typically these are non-scheduled. They come into your ER, the same manual registration, the same manual accident investigation. If they tell you the name of the employer, you have to call the employer. That's usually all you get. I have to be honest, I'm not even sure who my workers' comp payer is. I can tell you the name of my company, but I can't tell you more than that. So you've got to call my HR team and try to get in touch with them. So you're looking at typically more than one phone call to try to have that conversation. On the billing cycle, again, very, very similar. To build these claims out, a lot of times it's paper, it's manual. You're submitting these through the mail or fax. When they pay these claims, a lot of times it's a check coming back to the hospital, whether it's from the employer or the TPA, third party administrator, or the actual carrier. And then you have to do a line item payment verification and make sure these are paid correctly. You're not allowed to accept more. You're not allowed to accept less. So it involves, again, just a more uniqueness with these claims. A lot of strict administrative and legal compliance with workers' comp as well. So very similar in nature. I think that's why you see so many vendors in this niche that do auto as well as workers' comp, because they're quite similar. Okay, so that's sort of a level set. So why do these claims matter so much? Well, I would argue there's really basically three primary reasons. I mean, there's more than this, but when you look at this in terms of order of magnitude, they're really compliance, revenue, and complexity. So when you think about compliance, this used to, I mean, it's always been important, particularly with Medicare secondary payer rules. This is becoming even more important now because of so many class actions and some hospitals candidly doing this wrong, some vendors doing this wrong. And so it's becoming a little bit more challenging. And we're seeing hospitals really face, beyond just MSP compliance, which involves its own sort of steps to navigate through, coordination of benefits issues, billing liability versus no fault versus commercial health insurance, getting in trouble. There's hold harmless clauses in a lot of your payer agreements. There's hold harmless clauses in state law. And so these class actions that we're seeing filed are very rarely landing on the side of the provider. And we're seeing significant monetary penalties come out of these. Small hospitals seeing multi-million-dollar lawsuits. Saw a class action about a year ago that allowed the plaintiff lawyer to go back 10 years to see where some of this pattern and practice had happened. So quite significant. Revenue obviously is one of the reasons why we think these matter. If you manage these claims correctly, if you bill these claims in the correct order with a fairly efficient process where your cost is somewhat low, these claims can generate meaningful ROI and I've mentioned before, our average ROI for our clients netting out our fees about 350%. So these can yield meaningful dollars. Part of what I left out was when I talk about the complexity of these claims, in general, typically these claims are about 3% of the total population of accounts that the hospital might see. So it's a very small number of claims that are very complex, but again, have some sticky compliance issues. Revenue can be greater and yield meaningful reason to try to pay attention to these claims, but they're also very complex. They're obviously, as we talked about in the previous slides, very complex. They're very different from the other accounts that your team typically sees. So it's hard to remember how to deal with these claims. And by the way, if I don't get to your questions, and there's been one that's come in, if I don't get to these, I will get to them. I'll respond to you after the fact. I'm keeping track of these, so I'm happy to email you follow-up answers after this is completed. So let's look at property and casualty from sort of a legal nomenclature standpoint. This is important. I see this because I see depositions where hospital employees have said the wrong thing and it's gotten them in trouble. So let's start with no fault insurance. So no fault insurance In this world, what I'm talking about is MedPay or PIP. They're very similar. States are different in terms of how or when they allow them. MedPay is insurance coverage that typically pays medical bills up to the limits that they might have. Typical limits are around $5,000, and often it's an elected insurance, and it exists in about 35 states. So these pay with really no questions asked, up to the limits. There's no consistent anything in this niche, but typically they'll pay up to their limits based upon your bill amount. And we see of the claims that we get paid in MedPay states, we see about 40% of these pay at full gross charges. Covers the insured. Personal injury protection, very similar. These are in typically mandatory insurance states. They require you have these PIP benefits on your automobile. They're very similar to MedPay, but they cover a little more sometimes, things like lost wages, medical, in addition to medical bills. And the purpose of this was really to prevent an injured party from suing an at-fault party, to try to cut down on litigation. We see this in states like Florida and Kentucky, Michigan, and to be candid, it really hasn't worked. It hasn't prevented many people from suing the at-fault party. And we're actually tracking some different states right now that are looking at changing this. So if you're in a PIP state, keep an eye on that. My guess is they might start changing this more and more. Liability insurance is not for the insured. Liabilities is is insurance is paid by the at-fault driver to help them if they owe the injured party money, right? I think we're all familiar with liability insurance. The error I see is that hospitals notoriously call auto claims liability claims. They group all auto claims into this one payer source, and that's an error. It really, in a healthy book of business, depending on your state, you should see these claims about 50-50. 50% of the dollars should come from no fault insurance, 50% from liability insurance if you're billing them correctly. So these are not all, quote unquote, just liability claims. Workers' compensation. Typically, workers' compensation is really understood. People understand it's basically it allows for payment to an employee that is injured during and in the course of their employment. Typically, it's a fee schedule oriented payment schedule. Sometimes we see these based upon usual and customary payment methodologies. So just some high level insurance definitions before we get started. Now, the next several pages here, I will not go into in a whole lot of detail. There's just not a lot of time, but I wanted to provide these to you because it gives you sort of the high level legal status as to each state in Region 11. And just so you understand sort of the architecture of these pages, Alaska, compulsory coverage, 50, 125. I've given you the codes here so you can go and look at those, but $50,000 in insurance for the individual, no more than $100,000. You can see here MedPay or PIP. Alaska is a MedPay state. It's not required, although drivers do carry this insurance oftentimes. Does it have a hospital lien law? Yes. And here's some of the rules on how to file these liens. Like, for example, there's no strict deadline in Alaska in terms of timely filing. How do you file notice? Any cost associated? You can see here their fees relatively low. It's $20, and what they attach to. I will tell you, by the way, most of the time, these hospital lien laws do not attach to things like uninsured motorist insurance, things like that. So it's important to understand where and how to file these liens and maintain an ongoing sort of thumb on the pulse, because the way that these lien laws are sometimes interpreted can change based upon cases that come out and judges' interpretation. Workers' compensation in Alaska, it's a fee schedule. The governing bodies, the Alaska Department of Labor and Workforce Development. I provided a link here. Again, if you get this will take you to the fee schedule and some more detail about workers' comp. So I wanted to give you sort of a high-level understanding of how these are laid out. I've got each state here, so you can see the differences. This is where, by the way, if you're a health system that has multiple locations in different states, you could understand how challenging this is for some of these health systems to maintain processes that are defined by state. Hawaii, for example, PIP state, minimum requirement is $10,000. So you got to bill that PIP before you can bill health insurance. Lien law, workers' comp fee schedule, similar to most states. And then if there is a unique case law or something that's very sort of off than we normally see, I did try to include that in this bottom bullet point, if any, to tell you what those differences might look like. So I'm going to continue. There's a question here. I've gotten a few questions. One is, do hospital liens also include primary care clinics, or is it strictly applied to hospitals? That's really dependent upon the jurisdiction. Most lien laws are really exclusive to hospitals. Some state lien laws will apply to physician practices as well. So you just really need to consult your state lien law to make that determination. And most of this, I've given you where some of these statutes are, so you can go look those up. Okay, so I'm checking my time. We're doing well. We're at 25 after. So let's talk about doing this in-house, managing these claims in-house. And this is really where the bulk of the presentation I want to spend today. How can you do this, and how can you do this right? Well, like everything in revenue cycle, it begins with registration. And this might seem obvious, but it's really not, in my experience, when I've worked with so many hospitals. So I wanted to spend some time here. But when a patient arrives at a hospital, the first question we really encourage, we train. Anytime we go live at a hospital, we come on site and we spend a healthy amount of time training their patient access staff on who we are and also how to manage these claims. And the first thing we try to teach them is, when a patient presents, doesn't matter why they're presenting, always ask them, are you here because of an accident or an illness? That seems very simple, but a lot of times access points of contact will simply say, hey, how can I help you? Or what seems to be the problem? These are open-ended questions. You really want to train them to ask, are you here because of an accident or illness? That will direct the patient to understand that telling you they've been involved in an accident matters. If I broke my arm in a car accident and show up at a hospital and they say, how can I help you? You say, I broke my arm. Okay, well, let's get you, who's your insurance? If you start the question with, are you here because of an accident or an illness? They'll say, well, I had a car accident or I fell at work and it caused me to break my arm. So that's kind of a good starter question. Capturing the insurance information, regardless of what their answer, always ask their health insurance. If they say I've been involved in a car accident, you still need their health insurance. If it was a workers' comp, this was a patient injured on the job, still ask their health insurance. You never know what might happen, and having their health insurance is a great safety net in the case that you might have to bill that health insurance. Sometimes the patient might refuse if they've been involved in a car accident, telling you, hey, this wasn't my fault, I don't want this billed to my insurance. Well, they may not have that choice. And if it's, like in a Medicare situation, if that liability claim is going to be, a year out, because these liability cases oftentimes take quite a long time, you want to go ahead and bill Medicare within that timely filing, that prompt pay period of about 120 days. So always capture health insurance. If they were injured in an accident, that's where you really start to drill down. What type of accident were you involved in? And they may not be able to tell you right offhand, but they should be able to. Well, this was a motor vehicle accident. If they do say that, make sure you ask if they were driving as part of their job. Are they a truck driver? Were they on an errand for work? But if it was not, and it was just a standard motor vehicle injury, these are the questions we ask you to focus on. What's the patient's contact and the auto insurance information? the driver's contact information, if it was different, either in the same car or potentially another car, an at-fault driver's car. So that's the third question. At-fault driver's contact and insurance information. If it was a work-related injury, you want the patient's employer, obviously, the phone number, and work comp care information. They probably won't know. So you need really get some designated point of contact that you can call at their employer. Another question that is helpful to ask is, do they know that you've been injured? Is there an open claim on file? I'm going to take a second to read a question. When people hear the word accident, they often relate to a car accident. I train staff to say injury or accident. The trickier ones are the cases where it is at home or another person's business. There's often resistance. What do you advise? Also, if a patient is deceased or unable to respond. Great question. Yes, there are a lot of premises injuries. Someone fell in a home, in their home, at a place of business, and there will be reluctance, particularly if they've fallen at a friend's house or something like that. What we advise when we train registration staff is to, hey, you're not the bad guy. You're oftentimes, because of insurance, and particularly with the Medicare insurance population, there are certain billing rules that you have to follow. There's some information that you have to capture to ensure that their insurance will pay the claim. That's what your goal is as a hospital. You're trying to get the insurance to pay the claim. So the questions that you're asking are really centered towards that. And obviously, if a patient is injured on site for a business or something like that, you might have to bill that claim differently, or at least investigate it. And in our experience, the more transparent you are as to why you're asking these questions, with the goal being, I want to make sure your insurance pays the claim and we don't hit any hurdles. Having this information helps us to ensure that that happens, helps you get the right information. If a patient is unable to respond, which oftentimes is the case, there's no easy answer. There is simply going to have to be an after the fact follow up to that patient or to some type of guarantor, family member, where you will have to reach out to call to see if they have some information they can give you. The other thing is, if they have been involved in an accident, even if they are able to talk to you and tell you information, most of the time they've not secured an attorney. So there's car accidents, there's almost always some sort of post-treatment insurance information that has to be gathered. And it's helpful sometimes to have, as part of their takeaway, some information they can take with them that explains to them, I might have to call you back. I might have to get some additional information if this was indeed a motor vehicle accident or work-related injury. So you help us getting your bill paid by answering our calls, by answering our mailing questions. And by the way, the one thing I did not mention here with motor vehicle accident with Medicare, obviously, if the patient is covered by Medicare, that does require a completion of the MSP questionnaire to ensure that Medicare will pay these claims. So this is sort of upfront in a snapshot. Our registration training is about 20 pages. It's not tough, but there's some stuff to cover there. I'm trying to consolidate that into kind of one slide. This is something that I think is also interesting, and this is sort of a best practice tip. Financial class. I would imagine everyone on this call segregates workers' compensation as a unique financial class. In fact, I don't know that I've ever been to a hospital where they didn't segregate these as a distinct financial class. What is interesting is that we see more, but we still see a lot of hospitals that are not separating auto claims as a unique financial class. A lot of times there are more auto claims at an individual hospital than a workers' compensation claim. I've just shown you all the similarities. I've shown you the concerns over doing this wrong. I've shown you the complexity involved with auto claims. If you don't carve those claims out, you lack a lot of visibility into how that claim population is performing. you lack a lot of ability to manage a standardized process on how those claims are worked. And so I would highly recommend whether you use E-codes or some sort of indicator that lets you know, at least at a summary level, which claims are motor vehicle accident related, to create a financial class for those. As I mentioned, MVA populations are typically just as large, if not larger, than work comp populations. They have a lot of strict coordination of benefits laws. So, workers' comp, yeah, you can't bill a patient. Well, that's just one of many. MVA has just as many loopholes and errors that could get you in a lot of trouble. So from a compliance standpoint, it matters. And the last bullet point I have here is they are so similar and they're very manual and they require a lot of the same activities. So having their own unique financial class, if it's not something you've done, you really should. And one last bullet point here is by also having them as a unique financial class, it allows you to understand what cost you're putting forth in terms of, collecting on those dollars. And is it worth keeping those claims in-house? Verifying insurance coverage, no easy route. I wish that I could have shown you a very simple solution here, but there's really not. You have to verify this insurance. You have to verify that the insured was covered or represented by the lawyer. You have to verify that the claim is open with the carrier or that the patient is represented by counsel. You may need the patient to assist, by the way, in opening up a claim, particularly with the auto and sometimes workers' comp. And I mentioned before, attorneys are typically secured after the fact, right? So you're going to have to reach out after the fact to ensure that there is or is not an attorney involved. Remember too that the patient should be supplying this information to his or her health insurance, but they don't always do that. So health insurance might deny that claim, even if there's not an action. If the patient hadn't assured you that they are not seeking an at-fault party. You then have to basically understand and verify the insurance address, the contact information. How do you get the bill to that payer for workers' comp? Ensure the contact, or if they have a third-party administrator, who the carrier is. If it's different from the employer, how do you bill that claim? Is there a contact number there? Who is that contact? And how do you ensure that you get the claim paid? Most of these are going to go out in paper format for most of the states on this call. Verify all the information for possible at-fault insurance. If they are pursuing a third party, you need to know who that third party is, who their insurance is, and again, as I mentioned before, who the insurance is. There's no easy way to do this. It's really phone calls and mailings if you don't have technology to help you capture this information. I'm sorry I'm not getting to all the questions, guys. I will look at those and try to answer them after this call. When you think about coordination of benefits rules, this will not be consistent across every state on this call. Nevada, for example, is going to show a different route here, but typically this is a safe bet for most of the states. Patient, if they have commercial health insurance, the patient is injured, treats at the hospital, the primary payer is the MedPay or the PIP. The secondary insurance payer will be commercial health insurance. And then after that, if there's a balance owed, that's patient responsibility, not the contractual difference between what the commercial paid. But if there's a patient responsibility, then you can pursue the third party liability insurance. If there is not commercial health insurance, by all means, at that point, then after the MedPay is secured, you can pursue the third party liability insurance. But this is a typical route if a patient is covered by commercial health insurance. If it's Medicare or a typical government insurance, Medicaid, Medi-Cal, that sort of thing, patient is injured, treats, MedPay or PIP is still a primary payer. Third-party liability is a secondary payer, so it's different than the commercial space. Most of the time, by the way, you are able to collect the full bill amount, so you're not held to just the Medicare allowable when you're billing this liability insurance. And then if there's a balance owed that is beyond, that is within rather what Medicare would have paid, then you can bill Medicare for any remainder balance. Obviously, this is not an MSP presentation, but Medicare does have an allowable here that if the liability claim will not settle promptly, will not pay you promptly, you can conditionally bill Medicare. That's known as what most people just call the bill, 120-day rule. If at the date of treatment, that liability case doesn't settle within 120 days, you can submit that bill to Medicare with some explanation codes that lets them go ahead and pay the bill, and then they'll subrogate any payment that they made against the liability case. So this is not completely bulletproof in all the states that we're in, but this is a really good rule of thumb. And by the way, we do see a lot of hospitals, this is where we see the error. We see a lot of hospitals pursuing liability instead of the commercial insurance because of the increased payment amount. That is almost universally a bad idea. You will get sued and you will lose. So be careful of how you do this. And this is also another reason why you should have a designated financial class, because if you leave this up to billers, it's a bad idea and they will make elective decisions that could hurt the hospital. Billing, I talked a little bit about this, but in most cases, these property and casualty payers, so property and casualty, auto insurance, workers' comp insurance, they accept these claims via paper. Most of the time, they're going to require medical records, particularly for workers' comp and in liability scenarios. Some states require these payers to be able to accept claims electronically. Faxing is typically the best route for if you can't bill these electronically. Clearinghouse solutions do exist out there for some of these property and casualty payers. It's a bit of a manual process to link to these clearinghouse solutions, but they can be done. And we bill electronically through clearinghouse function about 40% of all property and casualty bills that we submit on behalf of our clients. And we're adding every week to that list, but it's slow and tedious because these payers are coming on sort of one at a time. Always include medical records. It's just a good rule of thumb. Submit them when you're sending a work comp claim. Go ahead and submit the electronic medical records. Redact anything that is obviously not important. Submit those out. When working with the attorney, submit the medical records as well. Liens may be filed, as I mentioned. Many jurisdictions, all of them have a fee-oriented. But that lien helps you to maintain your protection. And by the way, there was a recent article in the New York Times about this that was very poorly done. These do not affect these aren't personal property liens. These don't affect the patient's ability to buy and sell a home. These are simply security against that liability case. It protects the hospital. And if the lawyer ignores that lien, you can pursue the law firm for monies that you might be owed as a result of that settlement. Payments. Most of this is paper-based, okay, right? I mean, you guys get that. But when workers' comp payments come in, most hospitals will run these through, check to see if they're paid correctly. Really encourage you guys to do a line item payment verification. You could have a total that matches, but some of the line items are off. So really go through and try to do a line item payment verification protocol on these to make sure that everything is ticking and tying. A lot of states have invoice, surgical implant invoice requests or things like that. Make sure you've got a process defined to be able to get those documents to them. That'll speed your days to pay. Attorneys often request reduced payment on these claims. So I would suggest in these cases, really have a very well-defined internal protocol for how your hospital is going to handle these claims. If an attorney calls in, what's going to happen? I see typically one of two mistakes that our hospitals make. Either they demand full payment and they're not going to do anything but demand full payment, they're too rigid, or they're too easily reducing the debt. If they demand full payment, typically the payer will, or the lawyer will put this into an interpleader action and tell the judge what's happening, and the judge is not going to be that friendly. And candidly, there's just not typically enough money to pay everyone full gross charges. And likewise, reducing the debt without really understanding the details of the settlement, who is a lien holder, who is not, So this, define your process. How are you going to grant or not grant a reduction request? I would suggest creating a single point of contact for these. Have one person that sort of manages these, but here's the caveat: have some sort of management oversight over that. We see a lot of times where these lawyers, a lot of them are good people, so they develop a relationship. And what you want to avoid is what I call relationship deals, where the lawyer calls in and becomes a little too friendly, and more discounts are being made than should be allowed. So have some sort of management oversight over who's managing these reduction requests. Track your reimbursement rates by attorneys, by your most visible attorneys. Obviously, there's probably a handful. Pareto's law exists here like it does everywhere. There's probably 5 or 10 attorneys that make up the 80% of payments that come to you. Understand who's paying and who's paying what. And if you have a lawyer that's paying you terrible rates because they're either a bad lawyer or they're just negotiating too difficult, give them visibility into how their reimbursement rates are comparing with the other attorneys. Peer pressure is a powerful thing. And it might even let you know that, hey, if we see this attorney representing this patient, we're not going to worry about holding on to this account. We're going to go ahead and push it to self-pay because we know the reimbursement rate from this or that attorney is going to be notoriously low. And also develop a protocol for handling when the checks come in. A lot of times an attorney will send a check in, mark it paid in full. It goes through, you cash it, and sometimes you're held to that paid in full language. So make sure you have a protocol there as well. If a payment comes in and references some sort of contractual discount from an auto payer or work comp payer, make sure you notate that and understand, does that actually exist? A lot of times these are hidden in these agreements, so you really want to flush those out and correct them if they're there. If you have to keep them, obviously you will, but many times they're in there like a silent PPO type agreement. So flush those out if they are. And a lot of times you will be told this and there actually is not a contractual provision. So obviously you want to appeal anything that comes across that looks like that. Some KPIs that we suggest. Couple of thoughts here. Whenever possible, we would strongly advise that you track any KPIs for your accident claims, work comp and auto, by a 12-month view. These are small in number. Remember, 3% of your total patient population. So if you just look month to month or day to day, you're going to see potentially a lot of variability. So the more you can see 12-month views, the more accurate of a picture you're going to be able to see. Some of the suggested KPIs, we track 20 at least for our clients and provide these back in a report each month. These are some of the more important ones. Number and amount of claims that you're seeing. Again, if you don't itemize MBA accounts in a financial class, you won't know this, but it's important to see, are you seeing a lot of these? What are the bills? What do they look like? With COVID, we've seen these numbers come down, right? Both in auto and work comp. You should be aware of that, particularly if you have a team working these. What's the reimbursement rate by property and casualty payer source? Med pay, liability, workers' comp. What's the average balance? Is it going up? Is it going down? If you have multiple health systems or facilities within your group, are they consistent? Payments, obviously the payments by property casualty recovery type, we see this very seldom. How many med pay dollars are you seeing versus liability? Most of the time, again, back to nomenclature, these are called liability payments and they're all grouped under one heading. What is the percentage of property and casualty insurance leads that you're IDing at registration? How does that look month over month? If it starts to decline, we see this with our clients. It's time to do another training exercise with your team. You'll come right back up. That'll speed your process. How many payments are made at full gross charges? You should see a significant number of these, particularly in the MedPay space. The total property and casualty paid claims by number, amount, and percentage. All of this information will help you make decisions that make your process more efficient and streamlined and productive. And then overall, what are the average days to pay by property and casualty recovery type? These will help you, and these are measurable and also can help. You can do things to help speed these up. I get that they're small in number, but these are some really important KPIs that we think would be beneficial. All right, just a few slides left. We've got about 10 minutes, and I'll try to get to some questions, but here's some tips that I'm hoping are not obvious. I left the obvious ones out, but as you're defining your in-house process, again, I think this is a non-elect. I mean, this must be your focus. You must have a solution around this. You can't ignore these claims. So as you're defining your solution, here's some thoughts. One, create a flag in-house. If a lot of times for auto claims, as I mentioned, the attorney is secured after the fact. At some point, by the way, these lawyers' entire case is driven on your medical bills completely. So that attorney will reach out and ask for information. Define a process. So when you get in a lawyer letter, when you get an attorney letter, what are you going to do with it? It should be your flag that potentially that is an auto claim. Did you know it was an auto claim? Did you bill that attorney? Did you file a lien? Did you bill MedPay? So that's a good flag for you to act on to push it into this process. Always follow up to ensure receipt of claims. Again, a lot of times these are mail or fax. So make sure they got the claim. The last thing you want to do is wait 45 days, reach out, call them, and they say, well, I never received that. Develop an internal crosswalk. I see this is very small and sort of obvious, but a lot of hospitals don't do this. When you know that you have an employer in town that maybe you see more than one workers' comp claim from, make sure you track some kind of internal crosswalk between that employer and who that carrier, that work comp carrier is, or that TPA is. It'll save you time. Next time you see Home Depot, you know the contact point is typically this person, it's this insurance company, it's this TPA. It'll just speed your process. It's very simple. It's an Excel spreadsheet. Maintain ongoing registration training. Again, if you're monitoring some of these KPIs, it'll let you know when to do it. But even if you're not doing that, every 6 months, it's a good idea to just have a accident claim tutorial that just reminds these people what questions to ask, how to ask them, how to register them in your system, and walk them through it. Just the reminder alone will keep these top of mind. And we see a lot of turnover in these departments, so it's a good idea anyway. This is more of a best practice stat, but in typical non-PIP states, so states that have MedPay, the liability and the no-fault recoveries, they should be about 50% of the total reimbursement on the motor vehicle claims compared against health insurance. Now, that's not universal, depends on a lot of things, your average balance, state laws, but typically should be right in that 50% mark. If it's less than that by much, then it might mean that your process is not fully taking advantage of these claims. Seek outside feedback from vendors like us. There's a bunch of vendors in this space, but ask them. Most vendors in this space that are qualified, that are good at this, they will come in and they will do an analysis on your claims. And most of these vendors that are in this niche are trustworthy. They're going to give you an objective feedback because they know if they get your business, they're going to have to own these results. So allow them to run through it. A lot of times they do it at no cost. So have them run this data to see what potential lift they think they could provide, and make sure you understand how and why. Also, this is an important one. Know who your payers are. Develop a relationship with these payers. Develop a relationship with the attorneys. These aren't the bad guys. And the more we start treating these guys as partners, the easier, the faster you're going to get paid, the more proactive they'll be about reaching out to you with information they might need to process the claim. Make sure you've reached out to the top employers in your area. Develop some sort of point of contact. It always helps the process, and very rarely is it going to hurt the process. I know I'm moving at a fairly quick pace here, but there was just an awful lot to cover. The last question really is, you should keep an open mind on these claims, depending on the volume and the recovery versus the in-house staff that you have. is it worth something that, is this something you should outsource? Most of the for-profit guys, most of the big academic medical systems out there do outsource these claims. There's just too much complexity involved, but keep that as an option. If you do outsource these claims already, test the market every once in a while, once every year or two, test the market, do a champion challenger relationship, get a price, get an ROI assessment just to see. There's not always a better vendor, but there might be. And sometimes doing this exercise doesn't require a ton of effort. And be transparent with your vendor too. Let them know this is why you're doing it. And they'll work with you to see if there's an opportunity. And if there is, they'll tell you. And most of the time, if there's not, if they feel like you're doing a good job, they should tell you. Now, they won't always. I know we do. Last thing we want to do is go into a hospital, go through an implementation and not yield better results. If we do that, we've ensured they won't work with us in the future. But when you're thinking about vendors in this niche, here are some of the non-obvious selection criteria you should consider. Obviously, any sort of objective, unbiased third-party credentialing is important, like HFMA peer review, class, rankings, that sort of thing. Technology. This is one of those areas where vendors should have really built the technology that hospitals don't have access to. Do they have that technology? Most universally, they will say yes. Don't trust. Ask to see the technology. Ask them to demo it for you. Ask them to show you the architecture and the benefits and the differentiators. Is it a bolt-on tool that they've bought and then just added things to? Or is this a specialized proprietary in-house tool that they've built? Anytime you hear words like, we want to put a bunch of people on site, or these are manual processes, those are alerts that let you know there's not a lot of technology behind their solution. Look at their tenure of staff, look at their employee retention rates. Those are key because there still is a very big human component to these claims. What their client retention rates look like, how many deals have they signed in the past 12 to 24 months. That tells you what the market is seeing in terms of their value add. Do they do an upfront ROI analysis at no cost? And this is a big one, with understandable logic and explained assumptions. Are they explaining all the assumptions they made to get to that lift number, and do they make sense to you? This is an important one as well. So don't throw me under the bus here, but please don't focus only on cost. If they're showing a significant ROI, you might pay a little more for it, but the end of day return would be worth it. So look beyond just cost, and really the more you can establish a relationship with the vendor, the better. Treat them as a partner, but do avoid signing deals just based upon a relationship. Don't just sign the one because Betty knows John at this vendor. Oftentimes these can be objectively made decisions, and they should be. Ask for their implementation plan. This is an important part. And as you're starting out with any new vendor, you will have to go through an implementation plan and process. These can be brutal. They can be delayed. They can cause a lot of back-end problems. So understand what their plan looks like. Do they have best practices? And do they have options within that plan? But allow yourself to trust. If they bring best practices, do give yourself the ability to trust in these, because oftentimes these vendors have thought a lot more about these claims than you have. So allow for some room there that they might have a better solution than you've thought of in terms of how the relationship might work. And then lastly, I would just suggest, if you're looking for a vendor, make sure that it has a balance of what I suggest these things. We see a lot of vendors out there that just focus on technology, or just focus on the fact that they have lawyers. You really want somebody that has sort of, results, tenure, references, a heavy focus on technology. They have the legal background. They have on staff attorneys that can supplement the work as needed. But then you have evidence-based customer service that you can rely on through references or objective peer reviews like HFMA or things like that. So this is sort of just a high-level summary of that. I have talked an awful lot, and I tried to get through that as fast as possible. That really is the full presentation. We have, I think, 1 minute left. I know there were several questions, and I'm happy to go answer these after the fact. I apologize I didn't get to all these as they came in, but I will get back to each of you with an answer on those. And I hope this was helpful. And thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Michael. We appreciate it. And for all of you, you will get a copy of the presentation. Your chapter will also get a copy of the presentation. Most times the chapters will go ahead and post it to the website. So look out for our next presentation with the region coming up. I'm sure your chapter will be sending out reminders shortly. Have a great day, everybody. Bye-bye.